All right, how is everybody doing? Today is, I don't know, it's the second day after Christmas. Hope everybody had a great Christmas. And today I'm here with Mr. Mike Emirates, and we're gonna chat about the anthology. How you doing, Mike?
Good, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Just hanging out, having fun, and I don't have to work today, so that's a good thing. So, basically, what we're going to do today is we wanted to talk about the 100s anthology. We wanted to talk about creating story because we're a lot of us who are involved are going to be doing that. But first and foremost, I want to kind of describe what the anthology is if you haven't heard about it yet. But a lot of those who watch my videos have heard about the 100s challenge that was created by Kevin Cross, and that a lot of us have continued to do, and he's doing again as well. I think it's his fourth round now.
4 rounds. It's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. It's awesome, and love watching his videos. And there is a link below for him if you want to check him out. And also, speaking of, today actually is my 100th day of my second round. So, so that's kind of cool that it just happened to be.
Congratulations.
Thanks, man. So, and this isn't my official 100-day video. I'll release that later. But but yeah. So I've done it. This is my second round, and Mike's done it what, 3 times, right?
Yeah, just wrapped up my third round in, I don't know, it was like a month ago now.
hmm
Something like that.
And a lot of people have done it, and it's really cool. Everybody knows Gaz, everybody knows Samurai Ox, and I'm not going to start naming everybody because there's so many people who have done it. But you know, it's been a really cool experience where people have taken 100 days in a row, or sometimes, like in my case, not so much in a row, and for a half an hour a day or more. That's generally what people do. They will work on their personal comic project to start getting it done. And it's cool because Kevin started this, and like, because he started this, there are many more awesome comics in the world. um, and we're looking forward to his awesome comic that's going to be out soon. So it's really cool, and a lot of people have, I think, learned habits that are very beneficial to a creative person to get out of art
Oh, yes.
block or create creative procrastination or whatever it is that we want to label that. So yeah, it's become a really good thing, and yeah, I know you can attest to that as well.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's been a life-changing experience for sure.
Absolutely. So, what we're doing now is, after all of this awesomeness of people learning new habits and creating cool comics and stuff like that through this challenge, I think, we kind of had the idea, but I'm sure other people have had the same idea. But Chris McQuinlan, myself, and Mr. Mike Emirates were discussing privately just about all kinds of different things, and we thought about, how come we haven't done an anthology yet? Everybody here is making comics, but it'd be
Hmm.
cool if, like, we all got together and kind of did an anthology. And they were all we were all in agreement that it would be a cool idea. So we brought it to the people. And
Brought it to the tribe.
exactly. So we did that, and a lot of people seem to be interested in it. Some people are maybe not gonna submit a story, but they still think it's cool. And we also asked Mr. Kevin Cross for his blessing on it, which we got, and he will be contributing a little something, not a story, but a little something to the project to just kind of, you know, put his blessing, I guess, on the project, and it'll just be really cool. Um, so so there's that. So yeah, we're gonna do an anthology, and we've been talking about it, and uh, through the process, we kind of did a lot of different polls and everything. Mike Emmert's is definitely a big helper in kind of getting that all organized and talked about and discussed and stuff. And one of the polls was, who's gonna. We probably should have some leadership here, just so things, kind of work in an organized fashion, and it's just not a mishmash, and we're not able to actually get anything done. So we did that, and it's kind of I don't know, it's kind of funny. Maybe it was like a self-fulfilling prophecy type of thing, but everybody ended up voting, myself, Mike, and Chris to do it, since I guess we came up with the idea. So we're gonna be heading it up, and again, Mike and Chris's links are below if you want to check them out. And we'll be doing videos on each other's channels to kind of help the whole process along and everything. Um, so yeah, I guess maybe I'll kind of hand it over to you, Mike, to just talk a little bit about what the anthology is, and the theme of it and stuff a little bit.
All right, right on. Well, as Chris said, it's a anthology featuring everybody who has finished the hundreds. That was kind of one of our criteria, is that in order to be a part of it, you had to finish, because as we all learned, that making a comic it can be tough, and especially under time constraints too, So we wanted to make sure that everybody involved had at least done their 100 days and kind of proven that, they can go the whole way. So we each have 100 days to do 6 pages of a comic, a 6-page comic in total. And it's all in the theme of life in space, which we voted on. We had a bunch of awesome themes. Some of them were more specific to like Kevin. So we had like monkey and rad and punk and all this kind of stuff. But we finally voted on life in space. So everybody is charged to kind of interpret that however they want. And so some of the examples that we gave are like, you could take it literally and, make a story about, I don't know, maybe some astronauts up in space doing astronaut stuff. Or you can, stretch it and just use space as just a backdrop and maybe do a story about aliens on another planet, or take it not literally, but like figuratively, and do something like someone whose head is always up in the clouds, like someone who's spaced out or something like that, someone always daydreaming. That could be life in space. So pretty much just whatever anybody can think of to use the theme somehow, that's like fair game. So it should be a really interesting anthology, a good kind of combination of different creators and their own kind of sensibilities and ideas about storytelling. I guess the hook, like our little gimmick, is that everybody is actually going to do their 6 pages in 100 days as well. So starting on January 1st, that's our day 1, and we'll be ending sometime in April, right? I want to say it's like April 14th, something like that. That's when everybody should be done. And we're going to try to blog and vlog our progress. I think some people might do daily videos, although I think most of us are probably going to do like weekly or just kind of whenever we want. Because
I think Chris actually said he's going to actually do 100 videos, I think.
I think he did say something like that. I don't want to spoil any surprises he has in store either, but I think he said something about maybe doing 2 projects at once as well.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, he's a madman.
Yeah, he's definitely being quite productive these days, even though he's got a brand new kid.
Yeah, I know. He's even creating people.
Nice. That's my anthology is going to be creating a person.
I don't know if you could post that on YouTube. I'm not sure. You might get flagged.
Possibly. I don't know. It's science.
We'll find out. Stay tuned. January 1st.
Nice. So yeah, that's pretty much, I think the gist of it. And
That about
so,
sums it up, right?
yeah. So basically, what we were going to do today is kind of have a little bit of a primer video where, we're all starting to think about our stories. Some people have already got like their script done or something, and
Mhm.
some people are like, oh, just gonna start fresh on day one, and figure it out from there. So that's cool too. A lot of different approaches. Me personally, I know how much I procrastinate, and
Mhm.
yes, in 100 days I should be able to get 3 anthology submissions done. But the way I work, it's very possible that take it right up to the end
Yep.
before I actually finish it up or whatever. So
Same here.
I'm doing my best to yeah to get like a little bit of a head start and at least try to figure out the concept before I
Yeah.
start. So
That's actually something else that we should point out too is that, a lot of the people that are going to be submitting, we aren't all necessarily like professional comic creators,
mm,
consistently working on a deadline and getting stuff done. Like, I think the hundreds and, well, Kevin's, challenge, I think it attracted a lot of people from kind of different walks of life and different professions who want to be doing comics, but maybe don't have the time to, or
mhm,
in Kevin's case, he's working in comics and as a professional illustrator, but wasn't making the time to work on his own personal comic. So for most of us, that 30 minutes a day was difficult, and that's why it was life changing for a lot of people because, we have people that work 9 to 5s, people that work, even later than that, who have kids, who have
mhm,
other responsibilities. And so we actually did the math and stretched it out. And if you were to stick to the mantra of just doing 30 minutes a day, and then you also take into consideration that the average comic artist, professional comic artist, is supposed to get about a page done a day,
mm,
not including, and that's just one aspect. So, like, that's a page of pencils, a page of inks, that kind of thing.
mhm,
We honestly, most of us have just enough time to finish this. So it might seem like a whole ton of time, 6 pages in 100 days, but for a lot of people, it's actually still going to be a pretty big challenge.
yeah.
So I thought that was worth mentioning because uh, if, when this book is done, that's going to be something to behold. It's gonna kind of represent a lot of effort on a lot of people's parts, and I'm very
Mhm.
happy about that.
Yeah, that's a really good point to bring up because some people can do stuff a lot quicker too, like some people they can do a page a day of everything, it's just or they might be working at a kind of a smaller size or however they do. I know
Yeah.
when I made my mini comics, I was working at a smaller size and I could easily get a page done a day.
Mm.
And even with my process now, if I really like was working for, the full day, I probably could get a page done a day. But that, I don't have that time,
Yeah.
to do that, unfortunately. And also my style just happens to be a little bit of a quicker style that I generally make comics in. But you start throwing in a little bit of cross hatching and you can double your time real quick. So or if you decide you want to color or did do some digital stuff, or I don't know, or digital could make it quicker, analog could make it longer. There's a lot of different aspects. So yeah, everybody works at a different pace. So that's definitely a good point, to bring up. um, so this video, I want it to be somewhat of a kind of a service to those who are starting this out. And for myself as well, it's almost a little bit of a selfish thing because I was in the midst of my 100th day of making comics working. I've been the last few days I've been trying to figure out what I want to do for this anthology. And I was in the midst of it and I got to a point where I was like, you know what, I could use some advice, some help. So I looked at the Facebook group and stuff, and then I was just like, you know what, let me see if Mike's available because he knows a lot about story.
I knew there was a catch.
Yeah, exactly. But then we were talking about it and I kind of thought, this actually is a good opportunity to maybe do a little bit of a primer video to help other people also kind of start getting in that vibe of story creation and stuff.
Right on.
So I guess like how I would start, I was really inspired, and I made a post about this recent yesterday about the video that I think it was your first live hangout you published,
Hmm.
and what you guys were talking about a lot of stuff. I,
Oh yeah,
I think I
it's
think
very
you pretty
experimental.
much covered art in that video, um, but no, but at one point you did start talking about story and creating characters. You're actually kind of similar to what we're going to do here.
Hmm.
We're kind of trying to help one of the people who are on the stream with their story, and
Yeah.
there was a point where you started talking about like the 3 act structure and how theme is important and stuff like that, and that was really inspirational to me. It made me think, oh yeah, I got to make sure like I actually have like kind of a core to the story, and it's kind of tough when you're thinking about a short story. I mean, but having a theme or a meaning is not all stories end up having that, but when they do, it seems like it's more of a cohesive actual story.
Mm-hmm.
um so you know I started kind of trying to figure out, okay, what's my theme going to be, because previously I had been just kind of coming up with, okay, where is this going to take place, is it, and I wrote down a few things. I wrote down like different planets. It could take place on Earth because technically Earth is moving through space, so that's like in space. um, Stars, space stations, just different kind of things like that. And then I was like, okay, somebody had mentioned, having a story about kind of I can't remember the word, but like if somebody was doing like a certain occupation that's just like a very simple, basic thing, it's not like some kind of super epic like battle thing. It's more just like, oh, this guy's like a garbage man in space or something like that. Like
Yeah. Yeah. That's kind of what I'm
those,
going for.
yeah, those kind of stories could be very interesting. So I wrote down a few different occupations, and then that was when I listened to that part that you were talking about theme, and I'm like, okay, I need to have like a little bit more of a point to this as well. So I started writing down different possible themes, which I thought was interesting. And so, I mean, I'm just going to leave it at that at this point. But I guess probably a good way to start is you actually came up with an idea so far. You had a couple ideas, and you even wrote down the themes in the Facebook group.
Hmm.
But then you came up with a whole another idea, which I think you said you're going to go with. So I'm curious to hear a little bit more about what you're thinking, or do you want to not say any of that, or is
Oh
there
no, that's
anything
fine.
you can share about it?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm comfortable sharing whatever you want to know.
Okay, well, I know that even with your the Space Cat comic, there's certain things you want to keep quiet, and some things you want to share and stuff.
Oh
So
yeah. Well, Space Cat's a little different story. I definitely don't want to give up my secrets about Space Cat. But this one is really straightforward. So, I mean, I could sum up the whole point of this story in like one sentence. I mean, 6 pages. You can't really. Well, I suppose you could do a lot in 6 pages. I just
yeah,
chose not to.
right.
So I guess like more. What exactly did you want to know about? Like about the other ideas, or about the one that I went with, or
Maybe describe your process of coming to this idea, because you did. Yeah, you could start maybe talk about some of the other ideas, and see, we can see how you landed or where you landed with your
okay.
current idea.
Let's see. All right, so the whole theme of life in space was kind of like that was kind of like an easy one for me because I like space stuff.
Yeah.
I like sci-fi, and so a lot of the ideas that I have for just my stories in general are kind of already in that realm.
Hmm.
So I had one that was kind of like loosely based on a story that I wrote. I finished the whole script for it about like 4 years ago,
Hmm.
and I call it my Guardian story just because the characters in it are called Guardians, but it's not. That's not like the title of it. But basically, it had to do with human evolution and like the last humans on Earth and all that kind of stuff. And I always thought it'd be really interesting to like go back even further and do like a story kind of about one of the aspects of that story, which is like this android aboard this pod that's supposed to like save humanity essentially. And
Mm,
like, what if it malfunctioned and the thing woke up and like had no guidance, and so it had to sort of um, kind of try to figure out its own existence. And
mhm.
so that was sort of like a twist on the life in space thing. Like it's an android trying to figure out what it means to be alive, and he's floating through space. So, it wasn't like too on the nose. It was kind of like exploratory, not really like, you know, um, uh, it wasn't necessarily about like civilized life or evolved life in space. It was about something else, trying to contemplate life, I guess.
Yeah, which is actually very interesting because, that whole, artificial intelligence thing it's such an interesting topic as it like is that actual life or, that
Right.
whole thing and robots or
Exactly.
personality. And so I think that direction definitely would have been perfectly fine.
Yeah. And it's something that I actually have a loose outline for that I'd like to do some more with because it actually connects to Space Cat. So here I didn't
Mm,
want to talk about Space Cat, but slight slight spoiler. But
right.
so that would actually be one story removed from like the backstory to Space Cat. So that full script that I have, that's essentially like the backstory to Space Cat. So this little short story would be like the backstory to that story. Does that make
Ah,
sense? So
this like never ending backstory.
yeah, it is. But that's just kind of like how my writing works with my personal stuff. Like it all connects to something in some way. Even like some of the fantasy stuff that I've written, some of the more modern stuff, there's all little nuggets of each of them kind of connecting.
Yeah, I tend to want to connect everything too.
Yeah. So, but that was also one of the reasons that made me go, well, maybe that's a bit too much for this, because if it has to do with Space Cat and it has to do with, the world that I'm creating, then there's that potential that it's going to get bigger. And I didn't want it to get bigger. So I kind of
Mm,
shelved that one. Other idea I had was yet again kind of like another like detour from that world. Like it was another little branch. And
mhm,
that one was about a DJ who his whole, and I have a whole story written about this one too. This is actually kind of like an unofficial sequel to that first script. That's the backstory of Space Cat. This is like an alternate kind of course from that. So there's this DJ whose whole job is to basically travel the cosmos, and he picks up like sound signals, like radio signals, broadcast, satellite broadcast, whatever. And
mhm.
his job is to decode all of it and interpret it for other creatures in the galaxy. So he's kind of like this. He's essentially just a DJ who collects all these different signals and converts them so that other species in other galaxies can understand them and enjoy them. And he makes a big profit. It's kind of like super futuristic torrenting or something like that. Like he's ripping off all the music in the galaxies. But
Interesting. I
he's like a
thought that was
pirate.
going a little bit of a different route, but that sounds interesting for sure.
Okay. Yeah, so he's sort of like a pirate radio station, I guess. Then he broadcasts all these things, and but then again, that was still connected to this world, and so I felt like, well, maybe I shouldn't because that's gonna potentially get bigger. And so I was getting frustrated, so I just started drawing. And I don't know if you could see my screen now, but I can show you the
Yes.
doodle.
Oh.
Um, I was just doodling in my sketchbook, and I came up with this random character. Like I wasn't even trying to draw anything specifically, and I came up with her. I'll
Mm.
try and zoom in.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, so I came up with her, and I decided to call her Julie Jupiter. I don't know why, it just kind of sounded fun.
I love it.
And I decided she was a traffic cop in space. and that was like just really easily digestible. It was really mundane too. Like,
That's the word I
so
was looking for, mundane.
yeah. And like I didn't actually have this idea when I was drawing her, but once I'd drawn her, then it started coming to me that it would be really cool to create a story that was just about future civilization, like kind of like the Jetsons in a way, where like, it's just kind of a reinterpretation of modern life, but in the future.
Hmm.
Um, and so then I thought, that's really interesting. So I kind of wanted to play around with that and come up with some different characters. But looking at her, I was like, she kind of looks like a traffic cop. So what would a traffic cop do in the future? Like, what would that job be like? And so then I just kind of went from there and came up with this really simple, stupid little story. Like it's not full of a whole lot of meaning or anything. It's very straightforward. She's just, a normal run-of-the-mill traffic cop in space, on a space station, and she gets mixed up in this robbery that's going on. So
Hmm.
it's kind of like a play on like some old like Laurel and Hardy or Abbott and Costello style humor, where one of the characters is kind of like oblivious to the actual scenario playing out, or if they're not oblivious, they just don't care. They kind of have this ulterior motive in the scene. So she's a traffic cop. Her only job, her only concern is about the traffic and people parking where they're supposed to park or whatever. So these intergalactic thugs come flying in and crash land near this bank to go and rob it. And rather than being concerned about that, she's just like, whoa, 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 you can't park there. What are you doing?
Yes.
So that's pretty much the whole story, is her, trying to get them to move their car and getting into like hijinks because of it. And
Awesome.
she runs their plates and determines that they have several unpaid parking tickets. And as they're trying to make their getaway, she puts the electrified space boot on the vehicle, and the cops swoon in and arrest them. And then her little outro quote is just like, "Well, you should have paid your parking tickets then, buddy." So
Nice.
in a way, like the theme is just don't, always pay your parking tickets. It's really silly, but it helps guide the story, like I knew that I wanted it to end up there and have it be something that everyone can relate to, but not take it too seriously. So
Hmm.
that's essentially Julie Jupiter in a nutshell.
See, now that's interesting. Now, it's funny that you said the theme is, always pay your parking tickets. I didn't know, you know, a lot of these things with story are so abstract. It's hard for me to like wrap my mind around them.
Yeah.
Um, like if I were to think of that theme, I would feel like, does that count? Is that a theme? Like, I don't know. Like, it makes sense to me now that you're saying it. um,
Well, I
like
guess
what makes up a theme, do you think?
well, I guess my example would be more of like the moral of the story. Maybe the theme would be
Mm,
more uh responsibility, I think, would be more of the theme. So you've got
okay.
Julie, her responsibility is the traffic. And so despite anything else going on, she's going to make sure that no one's parking where they're not supposed to. She's very strict about her responsibility to her job. Whereas you
Right.
have the alternate, or you have the opposite of that with the bad guys, who are obviously not paying their parking tickets and being,
Mm,
bad members of society. And so there's that duality. And I think that's kind of where theme comes into play. So the moral is always pay your parking tickets, but the theme is about, I guess, responsibility. But
yeah.
again, it's such a silly story that's very, very loose. Like
Yeah.
I don't expect anybody to really read into it, but that's just kind of how I like to think about things. I don't think you absolutely need to, though.
Yeah. Well,
Not
I
in every
mean,
case.
even with that little thing though, it's like it could be like, little things amount up to big things type of thing.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
almost the theme
That too.
because in two different ways that's what happens, in one way the robbers, because they've done so many little bad things, eventually it catches up with them even though they're robbing a bank or whatever, like they're actually getting caught for the parking ticket. So so
Yeah.
that's interesting. And then also just somebody who is doing their job, you know, in a little way, and even though you would think maybe that doesn't make a big impact on the world, it could lead to making a big difference by catching a robber by
Hmm.
accident.
True. Yeah, there's a lot of themes that you can then extrapolate from that too. That's true. And I think that's kind of, I don't know, to kind of uh, give a point in favor of considering theme. I think when you do consider theme, then it makes it easier for people to extrapolate their own themes from the theme, you know, their own meaning from it.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Like I said, like a lot of this stuff with story is very abstract, and it's like when you're dissecting something you've already seen, sometimes it's a little easier to understand those things. It's hard. It's a different beast when you're trying to come up with it. So like I wonder like how is your process with kind of coming up with that? Like because to me like I'm like okay, I'm trying to come up with settings, I'm trying to come up with different themes, and like do you ever start with a theme, or is
Hmm.
does the theme come later as you're figuring it out? Like for me, when I write, usually the best way for me to write is just to I just it's as generic as just like coming up with ideas.
Yeah.
And I'll just write whatever comes into my head, which tends to be like this happened and then this happened and then that happens and this is really cool because nobody's ever done this, so that happens and then like so I do that, but then I look back at what I've written and I'm like, okay, now I have to give these characters a personality, you know, or I have
Hmm.
to create characters around this that make it interesting.
I see.
I have to, or do I have to? Oh, I forgot about theme. I have to inject theme into it, so like it has a core to it or a meaning. And I think moral is another synonym for that, you know.
Hmm.
So I don't know, like, how do you approach it? What do you think about that kind of approach?
Well, it's kind of different from story to story. Like, but I guess they all sort of start very similar to this Julie Jupiter, where I think the real kind of spark of the idea comes from the sketchbook. It comes from just drawing and not necessarily really trying to accomplish anything, but
Hmm.
something pops out that says like, "Hey, that's a cool character. I should make a story about that." Um, and
Hmm.
then from there, I just try to think about that character's life, I guess, and what similar to kind of what you were saying too about what they might do and what kind of situations they might find themselves in, and then from there new characters will start to develop, like but again all very superficial, you know, you're talking like the way that they look, maybe a general idea of their attitude, a general idea of maybe their job or what they like to do, that kind of thing. But then over time, when I actually want to make a real story out of it, then I start to try to think like, well, what am I trying to say with this? Like, but that's just me. Again, like there's more than one way to do a story. And so you don't always have to have like a message that you're trying to convey. Like there's plenty of stuff out there that's more just story driven and not as character driven. Um,
Mm.
but for
Yeah.
me, I definitely prefer the meaning. So I guess I'll just kind of stick to that and not, otherwise it'll be, otherwise I'll just spend this whole time kind of going back and forth. Say, well, there are always other ways to do things. But
Yeah, I mean there are. I guess I do want to explore the meaning one because that's personally one that I think is interesting. I think it's a kind of in some ways it's a shortcut way to writing stories.
mhm.
It's or I guess I shouldn't say shortcut, but it's like it's a little bit of a more like expedient way to do it. Like to me the way I think of it is like when people talk about theme, like that book Invisible Ink, they call it like the armature or whatever. And if anybody has ever done any sculpting or like anything with like stop motion, they know what an armature is. It's basically the bones. It's like the metal parts or whatever that you put underneath to build the clay onto.
Yeah.
And there's basically two ways, like when it comes to sculpture and that kind of thing. there's, either you can go an additive way of sculpture or you can go a
Mm-hmm.
subtractive way.
Yeah.
And both actually play into both methods, but there's primarily additive and primarily subtractive. So you could start with like a block of clay and
Yeah.
then make something out of it by taking stuff away and maybe adding a little here and there, but mostly you're taking stuff away. And then eventually, you have like, the sculpture of like David or whatever. And then there's, the armature method where you create the bones first and then you kind of build on slowly until you get to where you want to be. And there
Yeah.
is, again, scraping away and subtracting with that method as well, but that's more in the finishing of it. So to me, working with theme, um, I guess it's just theme first is more that additive thing, and you don't end up wasting as much clay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And like the subtractive way, to me, it just takes a lot longer because now you're like writing, and writing and writing pages and pages, and now you got to go back and read all those pages and edit it and just continue to edit.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I don't know. It's weird because that is the reason why I think that is good is because it takes the limitations off. It makes you be able to kind of wander and kind of stumble upon your story.
Mm-hmm.
But there's kind of a lot of possibly time wasted. If you start with theme, you can you don't have to do so much of that, take so much time with that, I think. I mean, that's kind of the idea I get.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Um, Having a clear theme in mind from the start and a clear idea of where your story is going, then every decision you make moving forward is all yes or no answers. It's, does it uh, does it convey elements of the theme or does it not? And then it
Mm,
is a little easier, I guess, to determine whether to keep it or to get rid of it. It all
yeah.
depends on what kind of story you're writing too. Like if you're doing something kind of long format, like an epic or a series, then that doesn't always help for like your long, overarching kind of themes. But um, yeah, I like that. I like what you said about additive and subtractive because I think you can kind of do both with anything that you choose, even with theme.
Mm,
But one thing I will say, because I've written a lot of stories and helped write a lot of stories in the past, is that I feel like you almost can't force theme. Like I definitely feel like it's a
mm,
little harder. Well, if you want to write something personal, I think it's harder to force the theme from the start. I think theme is something that you sort of have to discover as you're writing. And so starting in an additive phase is really helpful like that because you're not saying no to anything. You're allowing your imagination and your heart and everything to be involved in this process, and you're not being very strict with it. You're just saying, all right, let's just get out everything that we want to say and we'll sort it out later, you know. And then you
mm,
come up with all these little happy surprises and accidents, like, kind of, for example, the Julie Jupiter. Like, it's not the best example that I've got, but I just let that happen. I didn't have any idea in mind. I didn't have a theme in mind, nothing. I didn't force it at all. And I came up with this cute, quirky, weird little design that ended up becoming something else. So in that sense, like, I made it so open that it could be anything at all. And then not necessarily in like a subtractive way, but maybe in like defining boundaries, I sort of determined what it was going to be. And then from there, I was able to guide the story. So it's not, I mean, in that sense, that act wasn't necessarily so additive or subtractive. It was more or less just recognizing when it was something that was good enough to move forward with and then setting up the rails to, you know, help guide the story. I always talk about rails a lot too. Like
mm.
sometimes you don't want very definite um, rules, you just want guidelines, something to kind of help you along. Um,
Yeah, I like that idea. Like you said, basically, and you continued to basically talk about that is, you said you feel like you maybe can't force theme, and that you instead discover theme,
mhm.
and it's interesting because theme and maybe that's what helps you to decide what's a good story to try and what's not a good story to try once you do stumble on a theme, because that's, that's the thing that can help you make decisions moving forward. um, and yeah, it does make sense that maybe it's something more that you discover, so you still kind of, no matter what, you're going to have to go through a bit of wandering and not knowing exactly what you're doing until you get, maybe it's almost like you find that little piece of gold that just kind of helps you out throughout the rest of the way or something. But it is important, like with the subtractive method, like, because the thing is with that method is, if you're not recognizing theme as an important part of your story, of a story, then you may never actually write a story. Like, if you don't find that eventually, then you're going to be doing like a lot of work and then whittling it down to something that maybe has no actual bones.
Mm,
And if you don't find that theme, then your decision making might be hindered, and you might end up coming out with a story that kind of has a theme, but it might be kind of convoluted, I'm
yeah,
thinking.
yeah, I can agree with that too. Um, there is something to be said about having your theme ahead of time too. Like I feel like with a personal story, you need to discover it. But if you're working with a client, for example, or if you have a really tight deadline and you don't have that much time for discovery, then
Mm.
starting with a theme can be good. Um,
So, do you have an example of a time when you have created a story, um, literally starting with a theme?
huh.
Maybe,
I'm
maybe
sure
with
I
a client.
do, but it's been so long that let me see.
I feel like Jersey does this sometimes with his clients. Like, he's talked about kind of methods that resemble that approach.
Yeah, I know I definitely have, and specifically with one client in particular, but it has been so long since we worked together that I don't know how helpful it would be for me to. I don't even know where to find like the script that I would be working on. Let me see.
Yeah.
But something kind of fairly recently was I did the opposite, and that was where I just had a jumble of elements that I had to make some kind of sense of, and ended up kind of guiding it along by applying theme, by applying like a purpose to it. So you can work in the opposite way too, which
Mm.
I don't know. I'm trying to think of some good concrete example that I could give you.
Both seem very difficult to me. I do like the idea of discovering your theme kind of by starting with just, maybe just kind of free writing and kind of trying to fall upon something. And then once you find the theme, then it's like, okay, this is something I can build on.
Hmm.
But if you're trying to say, okay, I have a theme, I have to make a story about this, um, personally, in my mind, that seems a little more difficult at this point, and it's because I'm a new writer, really. Or if you're, like, going to just try to write a story and not even think about theme, that's, or if you have like an idea, I should say,
Hmm.
but you can't detect a theme in there, and then trying to inject a theme into it, that
Yeah,
seems equally as difficult.
that I definitely don't recommend because at that point you're just doing a lot of extra work for yourself. And so
Mm,
something, I mean, I don't know, it's tough because this sort of breaks up into a number of different elements of a story, which is characterization, and characterization usually helps support the theme. So a lot of your work begins there. And so if you haven't kind of determined what your theme is going to be, or at least what your characters are going to act like and who they are, then it becomes a lot harder to do anything with theme at all because really like your characters are vehicles for some sort of message and they don't
mm,
necessarily have to be it doesn't have to necessarily be like on the nose carrying the theme the whole time,
Mhm.
but it usually revolves around characters' wants and needs, like who they are as people, as real people. And so you may not know the theme right away. That could be something that you discover, somewhere down the line, but at the very least, it helps to know your characters well and to know their wants and their needs. And over time, that conflict between them and the world, or them and, maybe their spirituality, or any number of different, the whole, I think there's like 7 different conflicts or something like that. It's like man versus nature, man versus man, man versus self, that whole
Right.
thing. um, Through that, you as the writer can kind of discover the theme just by understanding your character better at the start. Does that make sense? So it's not necessarily so much about having the theme sooner or later. That's just like a method. But knowing the characters well and knowing what the characters want, I think that's more important than anything.
Hmm.
um,
See, that's interesting because what you were beginning to say, or what you said in the beginning of that part, you kind of was. It seemed like you were saying the opposite, and then you came to this, which, so, I like you said something. You said characterization supports the theme.
right.
And I was thinking, oh, so that, because that's another part I have trouble with. So like maybe once I have the theme, now I can build characters around it. That starts to make a little bit of sense to me. But then you kind of went and said almost like the opposite, like your characters, you'll find your theme through what your character's personality is and what their issues are, and how.
Right. I mean, I know I'm probably being kind of, I should have like had notes prepared for this,
Oh
honestly.
no, no. I think it's actually really cool because I'm like mining like little pieces nuggets of gold from what you're saying, and it's really fun to actually discover that.
I think the difficulty I'm having in explaining it though is that there are many different approaches to writing. And
Right.
so, and coming from the background of having done different approaches, it's, to me it's all just like a big mix of options. There's nothing
Hmm.
that's truly like one way of doing it. But
Right.
as far as the characters supporting the theme, I think that's going to happen regardless. That happens whether you have a theme ahead of time or whether you're discovering the theme later. It has to revolve around the characters at some point. They're what the story is all about, you know. To give you a more concrete example of why you might consider starting with theme as opposed to discovering it, that's how a lot of television shows, especially kids shows, are developed. They already have these characters defined and in place,
Mm.
and so they need to
Oh yeah.
construct a story around something. So it might be a theme of fear, and
Mm.
so if the theme is fear, then you need to put your characters in positions where they show how they react to fear. And usually in the beginning, it would be like, all right, well, one person reacts negatively and it hinders them in their life, whereas another character maybe embraces it and uses it to embolden themselves and they face fear. There, and these are really corny, simple examples, but that's like the start of your theme and how it applies to your characters, and then through characterization, your next step would be having the characters in some way reveal their challenges with fear, or reveal their mentor role in helping another character through fear, and then in the end it's some kind of resolution, some kind of message. That's where your theme comes to fruition, and you either go one way or the other. It's either good to be afraid or not good to be afraid, whatever your message is. It doesn't even have to be an absolute like that. It could be just more of like a vague kind of exploration of the topic. But so that's like a bare bones example of how theme could play very well as like your starting, as your basis. Um,
Yeah.
in developing something too, maybe, like I would imagine you might see this in a lot more like religious type cartoons, where maybe you're trying to develop a series that sends a very specific message. then you might develop a theme of religion, of spirituality, faith, and then come up with characters that could serve as like token pieces of different aspects of faith that you could explore throughout the story. So that might actually help you then develop the characters themselves, and they're going to represent very specific archetypes, of people who have faith or don't have faith, or are servants of faith, or antagonists, and you would build around that. That's another approach.
Hmm.
Or you just develop characters and people that feel real and go from there, and then introduce theme later. But either way, I think it does come down to just the characters' personalities and how they interact with these situations that you're putting them in. That's really the only thing that you're trying to get at is that. And it doesn't matter how you start or what you start with. What matters most in telling a good story is that you have strong characterization so that people, even if they don't empathize with these characters, they can understand them.
Hmm.
They can relate to them in the sense that they at least know somebody like them, you know, or can see how they could be believable. Maybe they don't know much about a space alien from some planet far away, but there's some element that reminds them of either themselves or somebody that they know. Um, and then from there, it's introducing this theme. It's introducing some kind of thread that holds the whole thing together, so that it's not just a series of events that are sort of happening randomly, but a series of events that amount to some sort of message. It doesn't have to be profound. It doesn't have to be immoral. It could be something really silly, or it could be something really deep. But that way, everything in your story is happening for a reason and not
Right.
just happening. You know, but again, I'll go back to, you don't need that. Like, if you want to tell a story just for the sake of entertainment, then you can do that too, and just make sure that it's interesting and that there's a lot of spectacle and action and things like that. It's all a balance. But
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, I definitely think you can. I mean, people have made a lot of stories, and like you said, sometimes it does seem to revolve more around spectacle and stuff like that. Um, some might argue that stories that are like that might lack substance, or yeah, that basically that they might lack substance because there are definitely like action movies that
yeah.
are cool, but you know, like I said, the theme could become convoluted, and I feel like if you don't come out with some kind of takeaway, whether it's silly, fun, or epic, and
Hmm.
paradigm shifting, if you don't come out with something, I feel like I probably wouldn't love those stories quite as much. I mean, there's obviously, there are like the cheesy horror movies and cheesy this kind of movie or story or whatever that don't go too deep with that I still do enjoy, but when it comes down to it and I really want a good story, and when I'm writing my own stories,
Hmm.
I mean, I would shoot for something with substance,
Yeah.
I guess. I mean, even if it's funny, just something with a core to it that you can kind of, I mean, you want to entertain, I guess. I don't know. It's hard to even talk about that, like, because I don't know. I'm not saying I necessarily want to change lives every time I'm like telling a story or anything, but
Hmm.
I do want it to be interesting more than just on a surface level, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. And there's a place for everything too. But if that is what you want, then the best way to learn about all this stuff is honestly to just absorb as much material as possible, and, not just reading, but studying it, really
Mhm.
uh, looking for theme, looking for symbolism and metaphor and all these different things in these different works. That's why studying the classics is really good. And I know Greg Giordano was on my latest creator hangout thing that I was doing, and he had so much just awesome information to share. I didn't even know that's exactly where the direction of the conversation was going to go, but I totally agree with everything he was saying about studying the classics. Read Homer and read Dante's Inferno and F. Scott Fitzgerald and Moby Dick, all the classics. I mean, because that was a time when they were really concerned about theme and they were really concerned about characterization. Really hardly there was hardly any stories coming out that were written by anyone who didn't have anything to say. Like the
Mm,
um, the days of like Pulp Fiction and stuff like that didn't really occur until much later. Um,
right.
Traditionally stories were written by intellectuals for other intellectuals,
Mm,
which is kind of where theme comes from. That's the more intellectual way of telling a story because you're trying to convey a very dense amount of information to people in a narrative form, so as
mhm,
opposed to reading an essay about it, you read a narrative about it. But, there's, I don't discount the other storytelling either. I think it's great and just as valuable. Um, I don't know. It's tough, but
right.
my main point being that, to learn about how to use it, it definitely helps to study the ones who used it best because it's difficult to explain like how to integrate it without looking at some of the best examples of that. There's a
Mhm,
lot of stories that are written that aren't necessarily about what their cover says. Like even the Lord of the Rings, J.R.R. Tolkien wasn't actually writing a story about hobbits and rings of invisibility and trolls and stuff like that. Like his whole thing was a satire about England at the time. It was
mm,
about uh no, I don't want to get too specific because it's been a while since I read about this, but it was about the pettiness of a certain class of English people. And so he portrayed them as these small little hobbits that didn't want to go outside their own realm of understanding, which is where the hobbit holes and all that came from. Like that,
mm.
his theme is pretty deep and political for the Lord of the Rings, but at
You
face
could do
value,
that now. You could be like, step out of your house, get away from the internet, turn your
yeah,
phone off.
exactly, exactly. So and that goes to your point of like maybe the more enjoyable things are more invested in exploring theme and not being as like shallow of storytelling, that has some depth to it.
Mm,
But even something like that, like it doesn't have to be no one has to actually get that out of it, but it might help just make the story better. It might help the writer himself just write the story,
mm. Yeah, yeah, definitely. That's interesting, and even like it does really depend a lot on the listener, reader, watcher. Because even when you were explaining your story, you're just like, well, the theme is basically always pay your parking ticket. But then
Yeah.
I was like, well, you could go deeper with that too. Like, like I could get some deeper meaning out of that as well, which
Yep.
like said, like the reader or whatever. So it is interesting. I guess I wanted to move on from because I think we definitely we talked a lot about theme and it makes a little more sense to me. I definitely, like I said, I like the idea of discovering theme, not forcing theme. Um, I think I've kind of understood that it might be a little difficult to try to start with a theme because like I was looking up like these like different sayings and quotes and like stuff because those are I think great places to mine and find like a cool theme or whatever.
Hmm.
And I found some that I thought were interesting. And it's like you can and I'm also thinking, okay, I'm thinking too hard about this. This is only going to be like a 6-page story, but at the same time, it's like, I want it to be a cool, I don't want people to just read it and be like, okay, well, that happened. I want them to be like, hey, that was kind of cool. Or, oh, that was interesting how he kind of came about that or whatever,
Yeah.
I don't know. But so I was doing that, and I don't know. So another thing that's very abstract to me that you started to touch on as well, is the characterization thing. And
Hmm.
you were talking about how, we talked about how characterization kind of integrates with theme, and you can kind of discover your theme through the characters, or you can also build your characters around the theme, which actually seems to make some sense to me. I don't know if I'll be able to make that work or not, but it seems like a way to possibly approach it. But how, when it comes to characterization now, this is another thing you guys were talking about on that live stream, is basically just developing the character. You guys talked about asking a bunch of questions. What's the motive? What's this? What's that?
Yeah.
What are their fears? Now, if you study writing, you're going to run into people giving that advice, saying, okay, well, here's a character sheet. It's
Hmm.
a list of things that you can ask about your character, so you can get to know them better. To me, I've never been able to put that to use. Like, it's just always been too abstract for me, because I'm like, okay, even with characters I've previously written before, trying to get more deep with them, it's like asking all those questions doesn't really help, because I still just don't know. Like, if I ask, what's the deep motivation or something, I'm like, well, I mean, I don't really know. I have to just kind of make something up out of thin air, or like, what's the
Yeah.
fear? I don't know. Like, how would I even make decisions on that? Like, can you talk more about how you develop characters? Because, like I said, that's some of the struggles. I don't know if you've ever had struggles like that, or if that tool actually was like something that really helped you.
Yeah, I've never really done the bio sheets and stuff for characters unless it's like I've had to for some jobs in the past, but that was more for like game design type stuff. Not, I've
Hmm.
never done it for any narrative writing kind of thing. But what I do, I hate saying that, do. Anyways, there's got to be a better way to say that. What I have done, there we go, I did it. All right. What I have done is just kind of keep rough notes about the character. I'll write like a biography of the character in a narrative form, like this is this character. She grew up here and likes to do this and works at this place and that kind of thing. And I guess it's sort of, it's more like a journal entry than a bio sheet. It's kind of like not, I don't know how to explain it because like I just open up a document or a piece of paper and I just start writing about that character, as if I needed to describe them to somebody else,
Hmm.
and I guess just through the act of writing, certain things get revealed, they might not be exactly, uh, they might not be conceived in a way that I'm thinking about theme or I'm thinking about structure or anything like that. And most of the time it's just random, but it's what felt right at the time. And then from there, I look at it and I think about that character and whether or not that fits what I want from that character or what can be tweaked from it. Like um, a good example I can give you is from Space Cat with the character Jace.
Hmm.
So he started out as a very shallow character without any kind of depth whatsoever. He just had like kind of a design, and I knew that he was going to be a mechanic of some kind. And that was just because I knew that he needed to be in order to make sense of something that happens in the second Space Cat book. And
Right.
so that was it. That was as far as the development went. Then it occurred to me that I had a theme. I had a story, a more fleshed out story, and it involved this character who was really powerful, and he was about to retire from being powerful. Essentially, he wanted to pass on his power to somebody else, and so in that land, there's like a big ceremony about the whole thing, and somebody gets to like inherit this power. The way that I kind of came up with it was directly influenced by my love for like He-Man and Thundercats and all that kind of stuff. And
Mhm.
so the idea was, what if He-Man aged, because in the cartoon he never ages or anything. What if He-Man aged, and then who would he pass the sort of power onto? Can it be passed on, And so
Mm.
that was essentially the basis of Space Cat at first. And Jace's character then I felt really needed to change. It kind of made more sense that maybe he wasn't this just static mechanic type character. Maybe he was a kid, and maybe he was a kid who was training to be like this He-Man character, and felt that he deserved the Sword of Power and that he would be the one to inherit it next,
Mhm.
which I know you read my mini comic, and at that point I hadn't changed Jace yet. He was just the mechanic kind of character.
Right.
And he really had nothing to do in that story anymore. Like he made some little inventions and whatnot, but outside of that, I couldn't figure out any use for him later on. I
Mm.
wanted something a little bit more interesting. So then I started thinking about the theme of power and what it does to people,
Mm.
And here we have this character who's very noble, very likable, who has used this power for nothing but good. He even states in the beginning that power isn't everything,
Mm.
And so, and now
Are
I
you
did,
talking about Jace?
no, the He-Man character. His
Oh,
name
okay.
was like Xandar, I think.
Oh, okay.
And I haven't released the second half of that mini comic yet, but I made it a point that he never, uses physical force for anything. That he's always trying to solve problems, similar to how they designed He-Man. So that,
Mhm.
um, and so that's an example of using power for good. Whereas Jace was going to be the conflict. He was going to be that
Oh.
adolescent who's like, he wants it for selfish reasons. He wants it to prove to
So
others that he's better than them.
So it's kind of like it reminds me of, I mean, I can't help but be reminded of it since I've been watching it all week and last 2 weeks. But Star Wars and Darth Vader and
Mm,
Luke, and
mm, mhm.
it's like Obi-Wan is kind of like your the He-Man character.
Yeah.
He's not going to use the power for bad. There's just no question.
Yeah.
But there's a conflict with Luke. I mean, even though it turns out he probably won't either, but that's where the decision has to start being made, and that's where
Mhm.
the drama is.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a classic template for a story too.
Mhm.
Um, but that's kind of I didn't sit down to tell that story, you know
Right.
what I mean? But I did start thinking more about theme and more about what the implications of this sort of character could mean in that world. And that's how I arrived at Jace. And then
Mhm.
he developed even further after that. So the story is no longer necessarily about that power anymore because the Xandar character isn't even in Space Cat anymore at all. And it becomes
Mhm.
more about these two characters, Jace and Onelia, and Onelia is his friend, and they have very similar kind of upbringings. And it becomes, in the beginning, it's a little bit more about how people deal with trauma and how they deal with life and the ups and downs of life. And we have one character that reacts
Mhm.
very differently than the other character, and so I explore it in that way where we have Jace, who's kind of abrasive and aggressive, and he faces his challenges head on, but he's kind of got a chip on his shoulder about it.
Mhm.
Whereas Onelia is probably stronger than Jace and could probably do a lot more damage than he can, but she's a lot more friendly and approachable with people. And so we get to see this balance between the two of like, how does he interact with people and deal with situations versus how does she interact and deal with situations. But then I flip it on its head in Act 3, which I won't spoil anything at all, but there's these kind of secrets that are revealed about these two characters.
Mhm.
And then I explore kind of the opposite, where Jace handles this information in uh, a lot calmer of a way and a lot more mature of a way. And Onelia has like her whole identity challenged, and then it becomes this exploration of identity. What
Mhm.
defines us? Are we defined by the people from our past, or do we make our own destiny? is sort of how the theme shifts over time. Then it becomes more about that. So
Interesting.
those two things have really developed Space Cat. Like, I mean, just keeping in line with that and constantly asking myself, like, does this scene tell me anything new about these characters and their, development as people? Do I understand more about them, or do I understand more about the theme? And if not, then I don't need it. I need to either rework the scene or, just cut it out altogether and do something different. And that goes along with that additive and subtractive kind of stuff, because in the very beginning, I didn't put these restrictions on myself at all. Like, I knew I wanted to write a story, and in this case, I let the theme develop over time. And that's when I started to learn that I was writing a lot about identity, and I was writing about fear, and I was writing about, these different things that were starting to kind of reveal themselves to me. So then I had this big mass of writing, and now it's become this act of chopping away everything that doesn't, help convey that message.
So
So,
it seems like, and it's funny because in your live stream you were talking about how important theme was. So I was like, it sounds like he's talking about you know, that whole like invisible ink type of storytelling where you kind of start with theme.
mhm.
But then thinking about, I've watched so many of your 100 Days videos, thinking about your process, I'm like, well, it almost seems like he's doing it from the other end, though. And now from hearing what you're saying, it seems like, you're somebody, the way you at least have approached this specific project is kind of more on a subtractive level, but you have a high appreciation for theme within that, and want to have that be an important part of your storytelling. And so it's kind of both, and it seems like a lot of these things are kind of a mix of many different methods. And like you said, you think of it as these are all the different options you have, maybe the tools you can pull out
Mhm.
when you need them. So that's really interesting that you're kind of discovering. And even your theme, I mean, it seems to me that you're saying that your theme has changed, at different times, because
Yeah.
when you were at that 24-hour comic making phase, you thought Jace was a whole different person and this He-Man character was part of the story. But now you've taken that guy out, the He-Man character out,
Mhm.
and changed totally what Jace is besides the mechanic part.
Yeah.
And your theme kind of morphed from a power situation to a self identity
Mhm.
type of situation.
Totally.
And so, I mean, do you think that it's possible your theme could still change?
No, no, not at this point. It's definitely settled down.
Mhm,
Even the villain, which I'm not going to say anything about, but he ends up reflecting a lot of these themes as well, and definitely serves as sort of the catalyst for each of these different characters to come to their own conclusions about what they are trying to figure out throughout the story.
mhm.
Meeting this villain and interacting with him is a big motivation for them to uh, make some better decisions for themselves, I guess. he's not he's not a role model, we'll put it that way.
So
But yeah,
once you found this new theme, what did you find that it was beginning to become easier to make decisions for the story, or?
definitely.
Hmm.
And I also knew my characters really well too, so it was easy to determine what they would do in a given situation, and it was easier to find out, the kind of things that would get them into situations.
Mhm,
Like Anelia, for example, she's very strong. She's a fighter. She's, her whole lineage is fighters, and they're trained in very various fighting styles and whatnot. And so it's kind of like a joke. It's a bit of like an inside joke, but I write it seriously. I don't write it in like kind of a funny way. But if you've ever seen The Princess Bride with that
mhm.
character, my name is Inigo Montoya. You have killed my father. Now you must prepare to die.
Yes.
She has this like similar kind of saying that she says
Okay.
whenever she's about to fight. And it's not about killing her father, but it's like, I have been trained in 1,000 whatevers and blah, 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 prepare to die is kind of like her thing.
It's
And
awesome.
so that might, like, make some people afraid to fight her in some situations, but then there's other situations that could easily get her in trouble.
Hmm.
And so that was just another fun little bit of her characterization that made it, interesting to tell the story. I knew that there were spots where, like, oh, what if she said that? Because if she said that, then these characters would do this. And, so it helped with plot too, actually, you know,
Mm.
knowing
Yeah,
these
I mean,
characters well.
I could see how, yeah. So it's like it's crazy because like that helps with everything. I mean, it helps with even the script and everything, the dialogue, I would think, and
Hmm.
you know once you can hone down on the theme and the characters, it really becomes a lot easier. So yeah, I don't know. That's just it's so interesting. To me, it seems like the way I don't know if this is how you approach most stories or not, but the way you've approached the Space Cat story is you've had an idea. You had like this. It's similar to how I approach stories. Like you have an idea and you're like, okay, it would be cool if they lived in this kind of world and like this and this could happen and that would be really cool and I'd like
Hmm.
to, this kind of character would be really neat to have in there.
Yeah.
And then you kind of came to a theme and then you're like, okay, but as it developed, it became a whole different theme. And then once you finally got that sticky theme that really motivated you to like push the story forward, now your characters are changing and becoming something more solid and
Hmm.
so
Yeah.
maybe the way I was starting isn't such a bad way. Maybe I don't have to have theme right away or characters fleshed out all the way right
Yeah.
away. Like
I
maybe
agree.
the point of where do you start is it almost doesn't matter where you start. Like start somewhere. That's a good place to start.
That is, yeah, that's a great place to start. No, it's so true. I mean, because you do have to at some point stop thinking and just start putting stuff on page, and that's really where all the work begins. So whatever helps you, find your entrance into that world, I say do that and just keep doing more of that. Um, I mean, obviously, there's more like structured ways to write, but if you're just writing for yourself and you're writing to make your own stories, then you have to do what makes everything come the most natural. I think. You know,
Mm,
at the end, you got to get all these pieces to work together. So, I definitely don't recommend focusing entirely on plot for too long before you've got characters developed because you'll end up rewriting a lot of stuff. I mean,
mm,
that's just something that I have never found a good way to start with plot and then add character and then add theme because it's like you just end up undoing more than you need to in many cases. Whereas like if
well,
you at least start with characters, that tends to help the plot a lot.
okay, well, so that's a little I don't know. It's interesting because I agree. Like that's the trouble I've been having a lot is trying to inject these things in. But even with Space Cat, that didn't even start with anything that you're talking about now.
Mm-hmm.
It started with a song,
It's true.
and then that turned into kind of a funny real world conspiratorial type of situation, and then you went epic with it.
Well, that's three different stories though. They're not
Right.
all the same story. So
But you wouldn't have this epic thing without having probably started, with that other stuff. Maybe I'm assuming it from what I derive from what you've said in the
yeah,
past.
that's probably very true. Um, Space Cat's an interesting thing for me. This is definitely like a unique way of doing things because I couldn't settle on what kind of story I even wanted when I first started creating Space Cat. And I was picking up writing after putting it aside for a while too. So a lot of my excitement and my energy was going in all kinds of different directions. And so it really became this experiment of creating different stories based on the same premise, you know. So Space Cat kind of spawned from this idea of what if this cat from space, fell to Earth essentially. And then I just started coming up with different variations on that. So it wasn't necessarily that they were each like a process of the development, leading up to this point, because I haven't taken anything from any of those different iterations and incorporated it in any way. Each of these I've started at square one with just the premise, you know.
Yeah.
So even in the very, very first iteration of this story, that was completely different. And that one actually didn't have anything to do with a cat falling from space. And that one I finished too. And that was more or less like an experiment being done on a cat to turn it into like a super cat. But
Huh.
they're all very much like their own separate thing. They definitely didn't. I think I would have ended up writing each of these no matter what order I wrote them in.
Mm, that's
Um,
interesting.
and I'm definitely still gonna finish the other ones too. Like there's the one that has Mike and Mel in it. The characters of me and
Hmm.
Mel and Lucas and all that. Like that's definitely gonna be its own thing, and that's essentially like the sequel to this. So yeah, it's a very strange situation.
Yeah.
But
Well, I don't think it's that strange. I think it's pretty common to the way people approach their own personal projects.
mm, yeah,
A lot of it is common to that. I know I've any idea I've ever had for personal projects has done the same thing and morphed into different things and become way bigger than it was ever meant to be and all
mm,
that kind of stuff. So now, I guess, and all that stuff is really interesting and makes me now want to work on a long form comic. um, but now, we're trying to make a 6-page story, a little simple 6-page
true.
story.
Yeah,
So, you know, that process of development, obviously, especially since we're trying to get it done within 100 days. And I mean, I know that I could probably, I don't know, take 3 days or 4 days or something and literally create the whole 6-page story in that amount of time. Like, how good would it be? I don't know. But I know that I could pump something out. Like, but so I'm actually tempted to do something like that too. But, um, you know, I would at the end be, decide whether it's worth putting in the anthology or not. But also, I don't know, like, how do we approach a smaller story? Sometimes it's even
right.
harder to write a smaller story. A lot of this stuff we're talking about, you know, it's not worth, spending that as much time on,
Yeah, definitely.
but
That's a good point.
all those considerations are also definitely something I think we should be thinking about, whether it's a small story or not.
Mhm.
But the approach maybe should be different.
Yeah, for something like this, I think, your best bet is to just come up with something interesting and expand on that. 6
Mhm.
pages isn't a whole lot of time, story-wise time. Um, and, I feel like definitely some of the things that we've said could apply. But it's not with the constraints that we've put on it for the 100 days and all that. It's not the kind of thing that you could really put a whole lot of thought into. I mean, at some point you have to make up your mind and get drawing. Um,
Well, I think one thing that's I've seen some people how they're going to approach it is
hey, it's Chris.
Hi guys.
hey, what's
Sorry, I
up,
didn't mean to
Chris?
interrupt you.
No, no, that's good. I don't know. I didn't mention it, but I did in the chat let it because he happened to pop in. I let him know, jump in if you're ready. So hi, Chris, how you doing?
Hey guys. I just woke up not long ago, so I'm still
Nice.
waking up.
So you're fresh and ready.
Yeah, yeah.
That's awesome. So
Sorry to interrupt.
no, that's awesome. I mean, if we had, if I was more of a planner, we would have done this all three together anyways.
So
But
good.
instead, I was like, hey, I just finished watching Star Wars and I need to work on my comic. Anybody want to chat?
Nice.
So, but yeah, I don't, obviously you haven't been able to probably listen through the whole thing, but basically what we're trying to do here, and you know, we've talked about this behind the scenes, and this is just one of the iterations of what we're going to be doing.
Mhm.
But basically it's just, it's a little bit of a primer, you know, since everybody's getting ready to start on their story. And everybody, if you don't know Chris McQuinlan, he I'm sure you do. Most people who follow me probably follow you as well, but he also has been involved in the 100s, and now we've, you know, decided to do, and I already talked about this, but we've decided to do this anthology with the blessing of Kevin, and heading it up is myself, Mike, and Chris, and his link is in the show, in the notes below as well, if you want to check out his stuff. But yeah, that's Mr. Chris there, and and we're talking about story. Like, how are we going to approach making this 6-page, you know, story for this comic? And I know, I think in the group, Chris, you mentioned that you're pretty much going to start on day one, or have you begun kind of coming up with a concept or anything?
Yeah, originally I was just going to go, pardon me. Sorry, still waking up. Okay. Yeah, originally I was just going to go 100% from scratch from day one, doing the 100-day videos, but I figured that was probably going to be shooting myself in the foot if I did that. So I have been writing down just themes. So going with our life in space theme, I've just been writing ideas based on that, and really trying to go outside the box too. Because my initial sort of idea was, oh, I'll do something like an astronaut. And well, I've already done that, so I want to do something really different, but keep with the theme. So I want to sort of throw people off, and I figured if I start from day one, I'm gonna spend a week doing videos of like, oh, I'm still toying with ideas. So I'm playing with ideas. I'm developing ideas in my head now. So by the time day one rolls around, I should be able to just dive right into the story. So yeah. Originally I was just going to do 100% from scratch, but I thought better of it, and I'll be semi-planned, but I'll be doing the writing from day one onwards. So
yeah, and I
it'd be
think,
interesting to see how long it takes me, because I hate writing. So.
well, I think that I think we're all kind of on the same page. We're all well, sort of on the same page. Mike's already got his concept, but you know, I think that's as far as he's gotten, right, Mike?
No, I've pretty much got a full outline. I'm ready to
Oh,
go.
okay. Oh, wow. You even have a whole lot. Now, I'd love to, on day one, have a full outline, and it's, you know, there's still a few days left. It's possible. But if I can start with a concept, I'll be happy if I at least have that. So I think Chris and me are kind of in the same place. I have been, same thing, writing down some themes, some ideas. I even did a little sketching of different possible ideas and stuff. And I think I'd like to get into that a little bit, but also let's, since we're talking about approaching story, or you actually kind of came in at a good point here, because we were transitioning a bit. And
Good.
yeah, so I would just like to hear a little bit of your take. From what I know, you, with stories that you've created, you've pretty much done small stories for the most part. I mean, relatively small, I should say. Maybe not 6 pages, but
Like one
relatively
shot.
small. Yeah,
Yeah.
one-shot stories. How do you generally approach creating a story?
Well, the most recent one would be Nevermore. So when I did that, I never actually wrote the story. I had the idea in my head, and well, you've got. Have you seen my other book, How to Make a Friend?
I have it.
Did I
I
send you
haven't read
that?
it yet. I read
Yeah.
Nevermorrow, and I've been meaning
Yeah.
to get to the other ones too.
Yeah. So both of those books I created in the same manner where I had the idea in my head and I just laid the whole thing out. I sketched everything out first and then just wrote notes around it. And then I built the story on top of that. So I sort of knew what they were going to say. So I'd do my first pass of just thumbnailing the whole book with a few notes here and there. And then I'd take my second pass and actually letter the thumbnails. So I knew what was going to happen. And then I would sit down, look at all that, make sure everything flows. If it doesn't flow, I can mix things around pretty easily because it's in a really loose stage. And then I'd try and get it as tight as I possibly could story-wise. So at least for me, it reads in a fluent manner. Because when I'm writing a script, like I have written scripts before, they don't feel as fluent to me when I'm reading them. I need to see some form of imagery to accompany that. So that's sort of how I approach it. But with this one, I'm hoping to approach it more professionally, I suppose, doing a script first and then thumbnailing, and then inking, etc., etc. But knowing myself, I probably will just go back to that method because it does work for me. I've never had anyone sort of come back to me after the fact and say, oh, I didn't like this because you didn't script it first. No one really sees that stage of the process. So they see the end result. And I suppose for me, it doesn't matter how I go about it, whether it's traditional or, if it works for me, it works for me. So I'll just stick with that. But I would like to learn how to script properly because I would like to write as well in the future. So, but yeah.
I think that's really interesting because it's like somebody who is a fan of making comics or a fan of reading comics, and who is writing specifically a comic. And I suppose a comic writer, somebody who's only made comics, and maybe if they decided to write a novel, they might even approach it this way just because they're used to it. But it seems like those who create comics have different ways of approaching story writing. At least, I mean, I don't know how novelists necessarily write stories. I've heard some things, but I don't think I've ever heard of them talking about drawing pictures as part of their process. They might, I don't know, but because even if you can do stick figures, and it might help them, but I think comic artists tend to be more visually oriented, and so they integrate that into their process sometimes. I know my writing process has been kind of weird like that as well.
Yeah, I've worked for a few friends who have been doing their own books, and he had a whole bunch of short stories and he sent them out to people to draw, and he's primarily an illustrator. So when he sent me all the stuff, I was just expecting this script for, I think it was about 10 pages. And when he sent it through to me, it was literally just really, really tight thumbnails with all the speech bubbles. And then a few notes in a little PDF. And he said, there you go. You can use all the thumbnails if you want. Otherwise, you can just, sort of change it up. But, the lettering's there, so you sort of know what they're going to say. And I'm like, this is really tight. Like, you could have just finished drawing this yourself. It's like, well, this is just how I write. It's easy for me to do this. So I'm definitely not alone. And like you said, comic creators, we're mostly visual. So it kind of makes sense for us to draw things down rather than just write words. I think I even remember Jake Parker, one of his videos, he was talking about that. For him, he needs to visually see things, even when it's just ideas, for him to really absorb them and digest them and let them grow. Because if they're just ideas in his head or words on paper, it doesn't work in the same manner for him.
Yeah, and it's weird for me, like the physical way that I do it. Like, I think for me, I skip a lot of steps, and like, I don't know, even my thumbnail process is pretty weird. Like, I barely thumbnail, and then like when it's time to actually do that specific page, then I might do a little bit more with the thumbnail just to
Yep.
kind of figure it out a little better. But and I don't really write a script. I kind of just write this happens and this happens and this happens, and then like I'll go back afterwards with a highlighter and like divide it up into pages.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of do that. I do like sitting at, at the computer and just typing away. I do kind of enjoy that process. But, then of course with the character creation and stuff, I get more into the visuals and stuff. And I'd love to take the time to kind of do the type of stuff that, we've seen Mike do in his videos where
Yeah.
you're creating a lot of concept stuff and creating worlds and things like that. But
He's insane.
yeah, I mean, but I've never gotten, I think I'm just kind of too immature of a writer at this point, or less practiced at it. So I tend to rush things. I just want to do it, and I let that hastiness kind of rule the day sometimes when maybe I shouldn't.
Yeah, I think I'm the same in that light. I just want to get everything down as quickly as possible so I can actually start the fun stuff. In my mind, the fun stuff.
Yeah, I want to get to the fun stuff.
I think this 6 page is going to be a real challenge for a lot of people. So like, I have been thinking a lot about Mike in this regard because I know he's been spending a lot of time developing this story for, I think he's done 2 100 days this year.
Yep.
Yeah, and most of it's been story development.
Oh yeah.
The last one he had a lot of, all this extra stuff that he was doing with the project he's working on now and whatnot. But yeah, I've been thinking like it's going to be really cool to see how Mike goes. Going, okay, I've got 100 days to write a 6 page story, and then draw it and have it done within those 100 days. I know he'll do it because I can tell if he puts his mind to something, he's going to accomplish it. But yeah, I don't. Apart from his the 24-hour comic, I don't think I've seen him actually do a lot of comic art.
Yeah, I've done a bunch of 1-page stuff that just sort of floats around on the web, but
oh yeah, that's right. I remember those. Yeah,
multi-page kind of stuff. No, not much at all. And that's kind of why I even started the 100 Days in the first place. That was something that I was very interested in. That I felt like I needed to start spending more time on. Like I need to actually make some comics.
Absolutely.
No, most of my experience
is
writing and visual development, but combining the two for my own purposes, that's something that I just need to do that more,
I know there's a few people who are really confident that for them a 6 page comic they could just bust out, in a couple of weeks. But there's definitely going to be a few people I think who are going to possibly struggle, or at least this is going to see them really leap forward in getting something done, because generally with the 100 days there's no real end goal. It's just developing a habit.
Yeah.
But in this regards, it's like, well, no, like whether they want to do the 100 days or not, you have to have this book done within those 100 days at least, so we can get this book printed.
Yep.
Because you're not just relying on yourself anymore. Everyone's also relying on you. And hopefully that push will really see people excel. So
no pressure.
I'm fairly confident with me and my plan, at least if I manage to finish my 6 pages in the 100 days, which I think I will, I'll just be moving ahead onto another comic project that I've got in mind, just to keep the 100 days flowing. But it still could take me 100 days, so I don't know. But watching everyone else as well, assuming that everyone does at least 50% of people will be doing the 100 days videos, that's what, 8 or 9 people doing 100 days videos all at the same time. I think that's going to be pretty epic and a real big push for a lot of people.
Yeah,
definitely.
That'll be really cool to see.
Because if I all of a sudden see that, like, say Holly, for example, I reckon she'll bust this thing out really quickly.
6
and
days.
I see Holly's, 6 pages in 6 days should be done. And when she goes, okay, well, I'm done, and I'm still writing the book, I'm just going to flip out and go, I'm going to get this done. I'm going to do this. So,
Absolutely. Maybe we should like have a contest that like who can do their comic quicker than Holly. I don't know if
first
anybody
person to
will
finish
win.
their comic gets a box of chocolates.
Yeah. Oh goodness. So kind of to backtrack a little bit of what we were talking about before. I am curious, Chris, when you do write, like, are you thinking about like how do you you kind of said your method of how you approach it, like physically and stuff, but like, do you start thinking about theme first, or do you start thinking about characters first, or do you just kind of come up with a plot first, or like, or is it? It's probably for a lot of people, it seems like it's different with different things, but you know, or maybe what are you doing more with this one, or?
For me, the first thing that generally comes to mind is the ending of the book, and my
Really?
biggest struggle is figuring out how to begin the book.
Mm.
So I always have this internal struggle of I want to start a story and introduce all the characters and get people really comfortable with who they're journeying with.
Mm-hmm.
And then as I'm drawing it, I just know that there's an end goal.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just draw it with that in mind, and then I'll basically, like I said, I'll really roughly figure out how that story goes from beginning to end. And then after that's drawn, I will come in and letter it, and that's when I build the story.
Mm.
And I will go over that time and time again. And even, like I say, with Nevermore, when I was lettering the book officially, like for the final letters, I was still finding myself rewording things to make sure things flowed, and getting people to read that as well and say, what do you think? And having their feedback saying, oh, I don't really feel like I'm relating to this character a lot, is really helpful. But yeah, my initial, I suppose, script is never a final script. It's always changing throughout. And sometimes like I'll even change pages and panels as I'm going through the book too, if I see that that's not working. So the 6th page will be a nice challenge because I think I'm just going to dive right into the middle of the action with my story, because I don't have a lot of time to introduce anyone. So I'm trying to figure out ways that I can have the characters introduce you to the characters in the book in a way that it's sort of not thrown in your face, but by the end of the story, you know who everyone is and you sort of know what their backgrounds are or what their intentions are. And then by the end of it, hopefully you'll feel some form of emotion for those characters. That's my biggest goal. I think I did hear you guys talking about this earlier when I was watching. I want people to connect with those characters, but doing that in 6 pages is going to be difficult, but it can be done. And that's going to be my biggest struggle and goal with it.
Yeah.
I sort of sidetracked this. Sorry.
No. That's what I was looking for. Yeah, it's interesting that you say you kind of start with the end, and a lot of people talk about that as a strategy. And now that I'm thinking about it, that idea of starting with the end is very, like, that's almost like finding another way to find your theme, really, because you know the end is like the punchline, and you know that a lot of times that's what it's about, is whatever happens at the end. That's where you come, where everything comes to like full fruition. So I never thought of that whole idea of starting with the end as the same, being almost the same thing as finding the theme. But I think
having an ending allows you to, throughout the story, sprinkle things in that people might not sort of realize are really connecting dots to what's about to happen. So when they go back for round 2, they start to pick up on this, and it's like, oh my God, I can't believe I didn't even pick up on that. Even just little bits and like little elements in the background or the things that they say or whatnot. But yeah, I think having a solid ending, something that's really going to just sort of punch the reader in the gut in a good or bad way, is a great starting point.
Definitely. That goes with what I was saying earlier about rails too, like kind of knowing where your story's going and what you want to say with it really helps. You know, that way you're not just writing endlessly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. And like it can change too. Having at least an ending that semi-solid, and then as you're building up the story, you're still going to have ideas and things are going to change. So you can still work around that and change the ending to work with you. But at least having that original goal, it's like anything. Like say if you want to practice soccer, you know, at the end of the day, like you want to learn how to kick a goal really good. So then you go back and learn all the basics to do that. But then throughout that point, you might want to be a keeper instead. So then you sort of just flow over to, you know, that side of things and learn how to catch a ball better than kicking a ball.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
It's a weird analogy.
No, it makes sense. It makes sense. Having a goal in mind obviously definitely helps you hone the things that you try to figure out for sure.
One thing I wanted to ask
Yep.
you guys, like with my stories, I never really think about it consciously, but do you guys try and put any real life elements into your stories? You know, your experiences in a completely different view, just to does that make it easier for you guys to write the story, or do you like to have something that's completely fictional?
Man, I could go on like a whole 2-hour podcast about that subject.
I had a feeling.
Crap.
The short answer is yes and no. Yeah, like I think for my personal stories, absolutely. All of it. Every time I try to find some parallel between my life or myself or something, I try not to write any stories at all unless I'm trying to learn something, you know, whether that's about myself or the world. I tend to kind of write the story in order to figure it out. So that makes all of them very personal. But
Okay.
for the anthology, you know, for Julie Jupiter, I'm just trying to write something fun. There's
Is
nothing.
that your story's name?
Yeah, Julie
That's amazing.
Jupiter,
I love it.
Galactic Traffic Cop. That's just supposed to be fun. You know, there's nothing really personal going on there at all. So a little bit of both.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is definitely, I mean, I think injecting real life into it it's just a way of, it's like rendering for story. It's just a way of like making it feel more solid, you know. It's kind of a tool for that. And obviously real life could mean like details of like, you know, like environment and stuff, but it could also mean like emotional things and stuff. So yeah, I actually have to run out for a second, so continue on for a minute, please.
Okay.
You can host this, Mike. You got this.
All right, we're taking over.
Hijacking the Donkey Joe projects.
So
So how much? I'm sure you guys covered this before, but how much have you actually got planned for your book? For your story?
quite a bit. I have like a full rough outline done. Like I don't have the exact dialogue or precisely everything that's going to happen, but I know how it's going to start. I know how it's going to end. I know exactly how it's going to end, actually. And I've got a pretty good idea of like just the general pace and kind of actions that are going to go along to fill up those 6 pages. So I'll be
Awesome.
pretty ready to go. I definitely need to do some thumbnailing though, so that I could work out the dialogue and timing some of the more humorous kind of stuff and some of the action kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
that shouldn't be too bad. I mean, it's only 6 pages. Not trying to make it too dense or anything, so I think I'll be all right. How about you?
I've written down about, I think, 6 or 7 themes that I've been thinking about.
Nice.
But one really sticks in my head. But I woke up this morning and then something else completely different sort of came to mind. So I'm battling with those. I'm also fighting with whether I use some characters I have planned for the next comic, sort of as a launching point for them, or whether I just start completely fresh and do, you know, a whole new story that's standalone. It's just on its own. It's just its own thing.
Yeah.
I think I want to do that because I don't want to mix up the worlds too much, especially with the theme. Yeah, so I'm fighting, but I've still got, what's the date? I've got 3 days to decide. And I feel like I just don't have enough time.
The pressure's on.
Yeah.
Seriously, this whole year just seemed to kind of zip by. Like it just happened so fast.
Yeah, man. I mean, you guys have both done 200 days runs.
I did finished up my 3rd, but yeah, I did 2 this year.
Jeez. Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Actually, I don't know if you were here when we first started, but today's actually my 100th day of the 2nd round.
Congratulations, man.
Thanks.
Your pages are looking really good too, man.
Oh, thanks. Got 2 more to go to finish out that story.
Cool.
That's Lizard Brain, yeah?
What's that?
That's Lizard Brain, that one, isn't it?
Yeah, Lizard Brain, and it's the first complete story. Will be the first complete story for the 12 stories book. So,
awesome.
Does that mean we're going to get a mini comic once that's all finished?
I'm gonna release it in some form. I'm not sure if it's gonna be a mini comic. I'm also kind of curious. Like, I kind of want to play, like, learn about the process of printing an actual comic, like through Kablam or something, because I've still never done that yet, and it's been a dream of mine since I was a kid. And I figured this might be an opportunity. I'll just like maybe put some extra stuff in it or something. Maybe a small story. Yeah, and I just want to try to see what it's like to print a floppy,
Yeah.
But at the same time, it would work pretty cool as a mini comic. So I'm undecided still.
I'm pretty sure Kablam do mini comics, don't they?
That I'm curious about too.
You could probably do some through another smaller publisher. I don't know if Kablam does mini comics, actually. They have a very specific template. It's either the standard or magazine size.
They also do manga style digest books.
All right, so that's a little smaller.
Yeah. So we'll see. I do plan on releasing it as an individual story. And probably a lot of the stories I'll do that way too. It's kind of a way for me to motivate myself to keep going, I guess, with this whole big project.
Probably better that way. You can start getting some feedback too from people and see what they're enjoying, and you can adapt that with other stories. Like you said, I imagine your stories are pretty solid, but you can always still rework them now.
Oh, I can totally rework a lot of them. I mean, they're all kind of. I haven't written 12 stories actually. I've gotten to about 10 of them, and then I just now, like, they're in a very basic rough form, but they're solid ideas. And then when I come to each one, I'm going to be doing more story development to really solidify them and create them as I go.
Cool.
But yeah, I mean, again, that project, 12 stories, is basically a one-man anthology. So with that, I'm doing small stories, and they are around 6 pages, more or less. They were originally supposed to be 5 pages each, but I think a lot of them are going to be more than that. This one's 7 pages. But one thing that is interesting, we're talking about trying to create these stories, and another thing you talked about, Mike, on that live stream was the 3-act structure. And we talked about theme and characterization. But I mean, 6 pages. Where do we put that 3-act structure? How does that work?
Thinking.
But also, like, I mean, it is possible because you can literally identify a 3-act structure sometimes in even like a strip comic in
It's
one
true. Yeah.
thing, or even just a joke. Like, I think knock knock jokes, you could probably
Hmm.
think
Totally.
of how that 3-act structure works, so you can fit it in.
Totally.
How?
I think short stories are a whole kind of beast of their own. They definitely don't necessarily follow 3-act structure. More like a 1-act or something. So for a lot of people, they tend to feel a little bit more unfulfilling because of that. But I
Mm,
think short stories tend to explore more characterization than anything else. Little
mm,
moments of human interaction and life and stuff, or conveying a moral or something. But I feel like when you have to convey a moral, it's kind of that structure is automatically imposed because you need a setup and you need but yeah, I don't know. I don't know if worrying about 3-act structure would be the best thing to do for something so short. I definitely agree it can be done, but I don't know if it necessarily needs to be.
well, I feel like your story has a 3-act structure already.
Um, yeah, in a way it kind of does. I think it's more just kind of a setup and a actually it does, doesn't it? Because there's a setup and then there's the whole action and then there is resolution. So yeah, I guess it does have a bit of a 3-act structure. More like 3-page structure.
Yeah. Well, like I said, you can literally even in a strip comic or like a joke, you can have a 3-act structure.
It's true.
Um, I think it was interesting how you kind of talked about. I actually wrote notes down the other day when I was listening to it to try to
Oh,
just
nice.
kind of see how you think about it and stuff. So, and you didn't even say. I don't think you even said the word 3-act structure, but you're like, if you divide your story into thirds, that's right,
Yeah.
3-act structure. But I thought it was interesting that the way you started it, you were like, a lot of times your protagonist doesn't have any clue, is kind of clueless on
Yeah.
where he's going, he or she is going, what they're doing, or like basically what the theme would be. Like they don't know what they need to
Right.
learn yet at that point. And then basically the rest of the structure kind of goes through a kind of a series of coming closer to that revelation and understanding,
Hmm.
and then trying to put it into practice.
Yeah. I mean, that's characterization in a nutshell, definitely.
It's very interesting. I haven't quite heard of it that way. So then you were saying, like, so basically the beginning is, you introduce kind of the world and who the person is, and there's maybe I guess the audience could kind of see what the problem is, but the protagonist definitely kind of can't at this point.
Yeah. Most of the time, I'd say that's definitely true. Otherwise, what do we care? We don't, we're just going to watch somebody do stuff.
Yeah.
But it has to be sort of evident that there's some change that needs to occur.
Hmm. And then they start to understand it in the second kind of act, and they're noticing things. It might be subtle. These are some of the things I wrote down, but they don't necessarily 100% know. And then you said, like, in the third part, you kind of divide that into two,
Hmm.
and they kind of get a revelation. They kind of really start to understand what the deal is and what they need to overcome or whatever it is, and
Hmm.
they try and they don't do so well at it.
Yeah.
And then obviously the ending, somehow, some way, everything kind of comes together. Whether it could be a tragedy, it could be,
Hmm.
it could be a heroic thing. It could be a lot of different things. But that's kind of when you find, it's the ending. It's how the story comes to a conclusion, basically.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I just thought it was interesting to bring up the idea of a 3-act structure, and I think that a lot of people may not have that in their story for the anthology, but it is definitely possible to have that. And I think that kind of goes with the idea of having an ending in mind. Basically, if you have, I don't know, maybe if you have an ending, it almost seems like that demands a 3-act structure. I don't know.
At its very basics, it's just a setup, a conflict, and a resolution.
Yeah.
So your setup is kind of putting all the pieces in place. This is Bob, and Bob wants something that he doesn't have, and then the conflict is maybe Bob has an opportunity to have it, but he can't have it, and the resolution is somehow through some means Bob gets it, or he doesn't, but he learned something from the experience.
Awesome. I have my story now. I just got to put Bob in space.
There you go. Bob wants a spaceship.
Thank you. That's what I was trying to get from this. Now I can not credit you with that, but I'll just
all the ruse to steal their ideas, Mike.
Hey, I spent a lot of time on that.
Yeah, so interesting. That is interesting. And then, like you said, it doesn't have to have, that kind of structure. And it is interesting. I almost kind of feel like Nevermorrow is almost that type of story where there is definitely an ending, but it's like
to most people's dismay, unfortunately.
It's kind of like, yeah, it's almost like it doesn't. I don't know. I'm trying to think of if that story has kind of a 3-act structure. It's almost like more of the other style where it's like.
I was actually trying to think about it as you guys were talking about it, but it was never intended. But I suppose I can see a rough 3-act structure where there's the setup where you're introduced to the main characters, and there's the crash, and then you've got them sort of searching to find some sort of civilization, which would be the second act, and then the third act where they're there and everything just falls apart,
Right.
And that's the ending.
Yeah, I guess it does, because also like, and when you think about it with like different stories, like a longer story actually has like almost multiple 3-act structures within it.
Yeah, I've heard of I've heard there's a theory. Well, I suppose people have done it, but I think it's a 5 or 6 act structure.
Yep.
Where they're not constricted to the 3-act. They actually build upon that. I don't know if you've heard of Ryan Lindsay. I think he writes for Dark Horse. It might be Dark Horse. But yeah, he was talking about it. If I find the link one day, I'll post it to you.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was saying that like sometimes he needs to go outside of the 3-act structure because it's too constricting for him.
Yeah.
And he can still create a fantastic story with that as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of interpretations of it too, because there's some that swear that things like a 4-act structure and a 6-act and and beyond are all just overcomplicating what's already there in the 3-act structure. But I think for some people, it really helps to look at it kind of broken down more, and that's what like a 4-act or 5 or even a 6 will do, is kind of further break down that structure for you. Whereas the 3, I mean, that's so general. I mean, what's a setup? What's a conflict? What's a resolution? Whereas like something like the 6, it really starts to break it down more in like introducing a mentor character and crossing thresholds and all these more specific kind of parts of a story. But it's all pretty much the same thing. Make sure that you define your characters early on so everybody knows what the story, who the story's about, define the setting, make some stuff happen, and resolve it in the end. Essentially.
Interesting.
it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, yeah, set up conflict resolution. Bam. That's
But
it.
that's, and always a little leery about even talking about structures too, because like they're really really helpful. But at the end of the day, I mean, writing kind of has to be organic. Like this is just advice on how to make something that's sort of like a recipe for good pacing and good rhythm and stuff like that. But at the same time, like if you can make it work another way, like do that. Like
Hmm.
at the end of the day, storytelling is just, it's kind of human nature. It's like when stuff happens to us in our everyday and we want to tell a friend about it. I mean, that's storytelling. We're not
Yeah.
necessarily thinking about act structure in that case. We just kind of spontaneously think of the important details. Like I was on my way to work and I ran into this person who said this and that led me to this, and
I saw Bob and he was looking for something, so I helped him.
and it turned out he was a wizard from another dimension, and you know how it goes.
Yeah. And that's funny because even in like you said, telling stories from life and stuff, just telling your husband or wife or whatever when you get home what happened in the day,
Hmm.
you do kind of craft it.
Yeah.
Well, those who can, not everybody's good at it. I'm not
I,
necessarily all that great at it, but
I was
often,
just gonna say that.
yeah, often you kind of do craft it so it kind of has a little bit of a punchline or whatever.
Yeah.
um
Like,
and there's that difference, like when people, you can tell when somebody didn't do that well, and it's like, okay, and then like when they do it well, people are either laughing or they have some kind of reaction.
yeah. That's like my girlfriend, the way that she'll tell a story. She'll get off the train and she'll be like, "Oh my God, you'll never believe what happened on the train." I'm like, "Whoa, well, why don't you tell me about it?" And she'll say, "All right, so I woke up this morning and I made myself some coffee." And I'm like, "Oh dear God, no, this is not how this story goes." Start in the middle of the action. Jeez.
Oh man, yeah, that's the other extreme. It's tough when somebody wants to tell you all the details, and
Yeah,
yeah.
too many details.
I hope Mel doesn't watch this, man. Oh, you're in trouble.
She already knows.
I do that too, actually, plenty. Sometimes I go a little too far. I try my best to condense it down, but it's tough. Like, I mean, storytelling isn't, like we're talking about it, and it's complicated. Obviously, that's just conversational storytelling, but there is definitely like an art to it.
Yeah. I agree. I think it's a little easier than some make it out to be, though, because I think and not by anyone's fault, really. It's just I think we're oversaturated with books and lectures and these things that tell us that there's only one way to do it or that there's a better way. Like things like that Save the Cat book can be super super useful, but at the same time it can also hurt too because it puts out this idea that there's something that some people are doing that's better than what you're doing. When
Mm.
like if you really look into like even famous writers, like they all write completely different from one another.
Hmm.
I mean, if HP Lovecraft wrote a book on writing, it would be like, all right, step 1, drop a bunch of acid. Step 2, lock yourself in a closet. Like but that's
Step
just
three,
not going to
right?
work for everybody.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt.
At the
But
end of the
I
day,
think those books kind of come out of the pain of trying to do it and not doing so well at it.
yeah, that could be too. Trying
It's
to
that
help
same
other.
theory that, if an artist never makes it, then you become an art teacher instead.
Yeah,
But, yeah.
Absolutely. All
but at
right.
the end of the day, man, I say follow your gut. Whatever works for you that feels right and that gets the job done. Do that. The more
Yeah.
you do it, you're just gonna get better at it. I think kind of like what Chris was saying, that feedback from other people. I think that's the biggest help.
Mm.
Just
I
get
was
the
just going to
thing
go
out.
back to that, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you guys plan on letting your stories go to, like, even the people in the Anthology group, or even just close friends and saying, "Hey, what do you think of this?"
I think for this short of a story with this kind of time constraint, I'm moving forward. I don't really have time to get it checked by anybody. But for other things, yeah, I would definitely let someone read the script for Space Cat when it's all done, and things that are more under less of a time constraint, for sure.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I'm still a little bit on the fence with that kind of thing. I feel like there's times when that probably will be useful, but I have tried that at times too in the past, and I've had a little bit of difficulty because you have to know when is the right time to do that, because like if it's too underdeveloped, people will comment on things that it's like, well, they don't really get it yet then, because they didn't, like I didn't explain it well enough yet, because it's not quite as developed physically, like in written form, as it is in my head.
Yeah.
So it's like they might comment on things where I feel like, oh yeah, well I'm gonna get to that, or in my head that question is answered, but they're saying that it's not, because it's not in written form answered yet.
Yeah.
So
a friend of mine sent me his comic that he plans on publishing soon, like lettered and everything, but he hadn't shown anyone anything. I'm like, can I just go through it completely? He's like, yeah, go nuts. And I went real hard at it too. Like, I wasn't pussyfooting around, because I don't see the point of, I want him to succeed and create a successful comic, so I'm going to point out what I think needs to be fixed. And I did that, and then he came back. He's like, oh yeah, I plan to do this, and I plan to do that, and I plan to do that. I was like, well, what you presented to me looked like a finished comic. Like, well, it's saying in your case, Marsh, could be what would appear as a finished script. So if you got, I suppose if you do plan on doing that, coming with something that you think is final, and then let people come at it, because if you've still got ideas floating around, you're just going to be coming back saying, oh yeah, but I intended to do that, and I intended to do that, but you didn't. You probably should do that first. So I'm not trying to correct you. I'm just saying, if anyone's planning on doing that, like I am planning on doing that, it's a reminder to myself and everyone else: be prepared for that sort of, not backlash, but people pointing out the obvious. Whereas even if you knew that was going to be done, do it first and then let people judge it.
True.
Because like, even for me, it was frustrating. I'm like, well, why did you give me something that you knew still needed to be fixed? Like, you should have fixed it first and then brought it in, for people to look at.
Yeah, totally. That happens with me with art sometimes too. Like, I know that there's something else that I'm trying to learn, but I know that I didn't quite nail my fundamentals or something, but yet I'll still ask for the help. And in the back of my mind, I should know better. Like, well, the help you're going to get is on the fundamentals, not the thing that you wanted to know about. Like, get that stuff in order.
Well, in that case, you should always just be very specific about what you want help with.
Yeah, exact. That too.
Yeah, and it's like I said, it's a little tough for me, because the way I do, especially stories and stuff, there really is no sort of finished thing to review until it's kind of finished. So like, it's almost not a thing I can do.
Even with like thumbnails or like roughs or anything.
Yeah,
like, kinda...
my thumbnails, like I was talking about earlier, like even my thumbnails are really rough, and sometimes I don't really finalize that until right when I'm doing that page. I mean, and even on the page I'm changing things, because like it's crazy. Like, I don't even really write a script. Like, I have some things that they're gonna say written down, but I'll just go and illustrate it, and then even while I'm illustrating it, I won't necessarily refer back to my script. I just kind of know what's going to happen and draw it. And then I kind of really don't write the words until it's time to put them in the bubbles. Like, I do write them a little bit, but I really write them when, it's time to put them on the page. So it's probably not a great way to do it, but I don't know. Stan Lee and Jack Kirby did it that way a lot. So
It's good
It
enough
doesn't
for
sound too
me.
far away from how I do it. So
Cool. Well, yeah, I mean, it all comes down to whatever works best for you.
yeah.
I guess if you wanted advice to fix things, it might be more helpful to have at least like somewhat of a rough stage where you have it sort of fleshed out. But
Yeah.
if that's not how you work, and doing that would, take more time and wouldn't help you in the long run, then maybe getting feedback isn't possible, not in that way.
Yeah. And I imagine, my workflow will evolve. I hope that it evolves and gets, a little more, kind of closer to something like how you do it, Mike. Because not that I want to do it exactly the way you do it, but like I do want, to develop things a little more, because it is tough when you go to the page when you haven't done all that stuff, because now you're doing some of that creation and development on the page,
Right.
and then not only are you doing that, but because you haven't created that yet and you're trying to develop on the page, you're also taking shortcuts, because it's like, okay, I have to make progress, and I'm not going to sit here and like do a bunch of turnarounds for this character at
Right.
this point. So it does hinder
Oh,
your
absolutely.
progress if you
I
don't
mean,
do that stuff up front.
the reason that I even do any of that though isn't because I thought that it would be. It's like it's not the way that I think it should be done, It's just because of my background and what I would normally do for work. I have to do a lot of visual development, so it's more of like a comfort zone kind of thing.
Mm,
Um, that's just the only way that I know is,
right.
is kind of what I'm getting at. And like the verdict is out as to whether or not that's a good way to go about doing comics. I know a few people that have come from like animation backgrounds that do things kind of similar to me, but they don't really share as much. So I don't know how close it is to what I do. But I think anyone coming from that sort of pre-production or even production kind of background, that's just sort of another day at the office kind of stuff. That's why I do so much of it. I'm not out to really make like an art book or anything like that. It just feels like that's what I should be doing. And it
Yeah.
definitely helps me, because at some point maybe I want some help, or maybe I want feedback on a certain aspect of it, and I'm just used to working in an environment where there's multiple people that need different information. And so then with something like that, you can easily pass that information on to someone else, and you'll get roughly the same result, as if you did it yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I could definitely see how that's super extra helpful in collaborative projects.
Yeah. Whereas like I see it as almost like a negative sometimes, because I would rather be able to figure things out like, like Gaz does. He does a lot of stuff where he barely does like a rough sketch on the side. He's just working out his roughs in the panel as to like
Mm,
what something is going to look like. And I feel like that's a lot more efficient way to go about making a comic. Like, but then there's other
well,
cases for it where like maybe you're doing a really long comic and you're going to have things showing up a lot. Then maybe it's beneficial to do, concept art and stuff for that. I don't know.
yeah. I mean, there's definitely arguments either way, because I
Yeah,
mean, you say that with Gaz, and that's kind of how I do it. Luckily for him, he's working digital, so it's a lot easier to go back and forth. For
that's true.
me, I can't really do that so much.
Yeah,
But you hear him talk about that, and then on his videos, but then he's also sometimes spending, a lot of time on just one panel and stuff, and
that's true
um,
too.
that's just how his process works, and so there's a lot of back and forth of what's better, what's not, in different contexts and stuff for
True.
sure.
So it all comes back to whatever works for you is probably the best way to do it. That's what
Yeah,
I believe. I mean, I think a lot of people get hung up on like there being one good way to do it or like a better way. And I'm such a proponent of like, if it works for you, that's the best way. That's the way you should do it, you know?
yeah,
I know a lot of people might think that I waste a lot of time doing a lot of my visual development stuff, but like that gets me into the story. That's kind of part of what helps me enjoy it and get
Yeah.
something out of it. And it's all about the journey.
Yeah, no, I mean, I see your process, and I'm like, for me, it's hard to think of myself doing that just because I just get too focused on getting the thing done. And like I said, sometimes I let haste rule the day, which isn't, haste isn't really a great quality. um, but at the same time, I love seeing how you do it because it's kind of a good example of what I kind of aspire to, as far as my process and stuff goes. Because I would love to, like I've said before, I would love to develop stuff more like that, and have a lot of those questions answered before I hit the page.
Yeah. But at the same time, you're getting pages done. So, that's nothing to take lightly. That's good too. Maybe we need a combination of both. I think is the ultimate solution. We'll do minimum of one turnaround and then get to work.
Yeah.
What do you think, Chris? Because you actually did a lot of like concept stuff was included in like the back of Nevermore. So you definitely do some kind of pre-visualization before you do your books, right? Or do you kind of come up with stuff as you go?
Yeah, I definitely spend a lot of time creating characters, at least really loosely. I'll show you some examples, actually. I don't know if my screen's showing up or not. Like I've been doing, like on my Patreon, I've been doing digital sketchbooks. So a lot of what I've been doing for my new book has a lot of their sketches in it. I'll load it up. Let's see, where is it? Yeah. Okay.
And is that stuff that you're planning before you start really working on the comic, or is that stuff that you do kind of like alongside the book as you go?
I generally sort of do both. I will sort of continue to build things up throughout the book, especially when I'm doing environments. So with Nevermore, I didn't have a base idea on how the environments were going to look. So I was drawing a lot of that and taking a lot of inspiration from things prior to drawing those pages. So when I thumbnail, I knew I'd have like a weird forest, but then I'd go, oh, well, this has to really look pretty alien. Like, I don't want it to look like it's, an Australian bushland. I want it to look like you're not. It has to feel like you're not on Earth. So, I'll spend a lot of time. I think it's actually in the Nevermore book, like that, the environments and stuff. Just experimenting with them. Like, I don't go too crazy though. Like, I'm not going to do turnarounds and do bio pages and say, this is who the character is and this is the 100 facial expressions that they might do. I figure all that out when I'm doing the book. But like for me at the moment, like the book I'm doing now, like you can see, like I've just been developing like this pig character who's one of the main characters. So I've just been playing around with like costume ideas and facial expressions and stuff there. But I think too with this, I enjoy drawing him a lot more than I did Mannix from Nevermore. So I'm kind of just addicted to drawing this dude regardless. So yeah,
he's a cool.
I think thanks. So I think that makes it it's a bonus for me because I really want to enjoy drawing something that I think I'll be drawing for a long period of time.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, because towards the end, like I did really get sick of drawing astronauts on Nevermore.
Yeah, all the suits can be a little frustrating.
Yeah.
This character looks like a mix of like a pig and a dog or something.
Yeah, he's sort of just this anthro pig kind of guy.
It's cool. I like it.
Yeah. And I'm just playing around with like different styles as well at the moment too, like coloring.
He's kind of got Han Solo's outfit on.
Yeah, this is a bit of a homage to Han Solo. This one.
Sorry, I'm picking out all your influences.
That's good. I'd rather you pick on it, pick them out than sort of not get it.
It's awesome.
So,
I love it. I already
if you
love
like
it.
Star Wars, then you're more than likely to pick it up. So, yeah.
Cool.
But yeah, so I do sketch a bit. But yeah, I'd say about 50% of it is during the development of the actual book rather than prior to the book.
Mm.
Yeah. But definitely helps. It definitely helps to have a solid idea of what all your characters are going to look like before launching in. I know some people who just draw the characters as they draw the comic, and it definitely shows because the characters just don't feel uniform.
Mm.
So yeah, one panel to the other definitely looks different. I remember when I started doing comics, that was like my biggest concern was the character has to look the same every time I draw him or her. And that scared the crap out of me because that could just completely throw off the whole story. Your story could be 110% solid. It could be better than a Stephen King novel, but if those visuals don't match up, it's just going to throw you out. And I've read comics like that where I'm like reading it, you know, I'm really into it, and then the next panel, it just doesn't quite look like it, and I'll like the character, and I'll think it's someone else, and it'll just throw me off. And then I have to go back and reread it and go, oh wait, no, that's the same person, and then I'm thrown out of the story. Like a good book should, especially in this regard, 6 pages. You shouldn't really have to look up and think about something else. 6 pages should be enough to just completely take your attention for that whole duration. So having solidity in that regards is pretty important.
Yeah, I agree. That's some good points, and I feel like I could definitely get better at that. You know, getting a little uniformity to some of my characters and stuff. I mean, I think I've done okay, but you know, it is good to have that design solidified. And there are times that I have designed on the page. Usually it's with just background characters, or like I remember I was doing the bus driver at one point, and it's like, well, he literally shows up in one panel. So I didn't know anything about it until I actually drew it on the page, you know, or like some of the background kids and stuff like that.
Yeah. I think it's important at the very least to just kind of solidify some sort of visual theme that you're going for, because then at least that can help guide you, even if you're developing stuff on the page, you know, like for example, with the Julie Jupiter thing, I know that as far as costume design goes for everybody in the world, I'm going for like space, you know, generic space suit kind of stuff meets some sort of like utility. So space with function. So I know I definitely want all their suits to have functionality to them. So that's important. So that means I'm deviating from like abstract. And then as just something fun visually to toss on top of it, I'm going for like 70s, 60s, 70s, like go-go kind of fashion sort of stuff.
Cool.
So that's just like, and I don't want it to be
sense.
completely obvious, you know, but like I definitely want to just take some stuff from that, you know, which I hope it showed up in the initial design for Julie. But
yeah, I definitely caught that. I mean, I didn't think of that until you said it, but now that you say it, it reflects that in my opinion.
Sweet. So that's like, you know, just something that's going to help guide me, I guess, at least, you know, a little bit. But I'm probably still going to take about a week to do some serious visual development for everything, just because there's a lot of things that I haven't even drawn before that I'm going to have to draw. So
yeah,
that might help. I was even thinking about doing some 3D, like in SketchUp or something, for some of my backgrounds, just so that I don't have to waste too much time measuring out a bunch of perspective. But we'll see. That's a little different than what we're talking about, though.
Cool. Well, I think it is. We've been going for a while here, and I think that we covered a lot of things about that could be a primer and hopefully inspirational to people to help them start working on their story on the first, or if they're starting even now. You know, I think, you know, it's good to include some of these concepts of character development and theme and 3-act structure, but you don't necessarily have to do that, and this has actually helped me to let go a little bit of that, because I was trying to inject that right away, and I'm realizing that some of that stuff is just going to come through discovery, so I need to
Totally.
kind of start with what's natural for me. And I think we brought up a point at one point where it was like the best place to start is basically where it's just like natural or organic for you to start. Like basically any starting place is a good place to start, because at
Totally.
least you're starting.
Yeah. And to that point, I mean, even Stephen King says to, don't impose structure on yourself in the beginning. Structure is to help clean up the mess you've made in the end, not to necessarily dictate how you should, proceed. It's because if you inject structure too soon, then your stories are going to feel really, really robotic and predictable and mechanical. But structure can help you solve problems later. If your story isn't working on its own, then it might be time to look at structure and figure some things out. But if you just get it in one go and it reads fine, then don't even worry about acts or anything like that. It's good.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that. And yeah, so yeah, start. And the best advice
Get that pen to paper.
Start. So yeah, hopefully, just for everybody who's listening, especially those who are doing the anthology, but anybody who's starting some kind of story-based project, good luck on that. I mean, hopefully this was helpful. And if you have any questions, maybe we can help. Feel free to contact either of us. I mean, I'm taking the liberty to say that, but you guys seem pretty open to helping people, I hope. I think.
Leave me alone. I'm a grumpy old man.
Yeah, so don't contact Chris. But
you can annoy me.
But yeah, I mean, if there's anything we can do, hit us up, hit me up. And yeah, I think that's about it. Chris, where can people find you online?
Best place would be on Facebook and Instagram at Chris McQuinlan Art. And that's about it. That's pretty much all I use now.
Sweet. And how about you, Mike?
Best place you can find me is at my Facebook page, Mike Emirates Art, or Instagram, or Twitter, and of course here on YouTube. I'm doing pretty much like weekly videos of some form or another. So.
Oh yeah, you can find me on YouTube too. Same thing.
Well, the links to your YouTube channels are already underneath there. So if anybody wants to find their YouTube channels, go ahead and just click the link. It's right there in the description. And everybody knows they can find me at Donkey Job Projects on Instagram, and donkeyjobprojects.com, and Donkey Job Projects at Facebook. That's the main places where I hang out, and of course YouTube. So
Donkey Job Projects.
Exactly.
I love that intro, man. I love it so much.
Yeah.
Good. I'm glad. The whole point of that is to make it so it's catchy and hopefully fun and doesn't annoy people too much because it's not too long.
That is you and Lindsay, isn't it? Is it?
Yep.
Awesome.
That's awesome.
Cool. So
you just do more videos just so I can hear that intro.
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping to get more videos out now that the hundreds this round is done, and I want to do stuff that's a little more like structured, or a little more thought out and well done than just kind of throwing the camera on and saying, hey, I did this today.
Yeah.
So but yeah,
that's fun too.
Go ahead. Yeah, that's fun too. I mean, I'll do that too, like vlog type things, but I want to do some more structured stuff too.
Yeah. Mix it up.
So thank you guys for coming on. Thanks, Chris, for jumping in later on. That's awesome.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks for having me too, man. Anytime.
Yeah. And thank you everybody for listening. All the people we did see you in the chat. shout out to all you guys in the chat.
Ox and Jan.
Yep, there was somebody else too.
That was me. I
I
left.
think there was some spammers too, but
Yeah, we had a
Corbra Illustration. Shout out to you. I'm not sure who that is, but shout out to you. Thanks for coming by.
yes, and some other people stopped in really briefly.
Yeah, there's a couple people. I think they might have been spam. I'm not sure, but if you weren't spam, thanks for watching.
And if you were spam, boo! No, I'm just
Thanks
kidding.
for watching.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. So we'll talk to you guys on the next video. And thanks for watching again.
See you guys.
Later.